Hola!
Hi, hola.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Screen. Let's get real. For real.
For real.
For real, for real. De veras. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are excited to have Miriam Mosqueda, an amazing poet, just a badass mujer, an artista that's going to be with us. Hola, 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 everyone. Hola, JCC Sculpture. Hola, Nesty and Yaya. Hola, hola. So we're just going to give it a few minutes for our guest, Miriam, to log on, and then we'll get started. We're super excited. Thank you for being with us today.
And the music goes on.
I know, right? Jeopardy. Or rave. Two different vibes, that's okay. Give us 1 second. So, Miriam is logging on. We're so excited. Yes!
Hey!
Hey!
I'm trying to find a way to put the camera para que no se caiga. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
All right, we're just gonna, it's gonna be like a little bit at an angle.
No, it's okay.
Hey!
How's it
Oh my
going?
gosh, so real quick, I got dressed for y'all.
Ooh.
So I have a little skirt on.
Hey, looking all cute.
My mom made it.
Vuelta. Oh, good to see you.
Hey.
How are you?
Hold on, let me turn on the volume. I can't really hear you.
No worries.
Okay, there you are.
I said, jaguar, you dijo el jaguar.
Oh, estamos bien. We're good. I'm good. Yeah, I'm feeling good today. The weather outside is really nice, so anytime there's a lot of sun and good breeze, I feel really good. So, and I'm so excited to see you both.
Yes,
We're excited.
It's been a while.
Yeah, for everyone tuning in, El Comalito Collective, Abel and Edgar are my faves. If y'all aren't already following them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for being with us today, Miriam.
Yeah.
So just to let folks know kind of how we know each other, we've known each other now for a few years. We met at an event in Sacramento where I believe you read some poetry, and then we connected, and we're like, how do we get you to Vallejo?
Yeah. Yeah, it was so funny because I was just talking about that. I was telling that story earlier. But yeah, it was super awesome, to be there and to just present there, and then that you all just so happened to be in that space, and we were able to kind of like build a friendship and just like collaborations and all of that. And I appreciate you all, like, from that point, like continuing to invite me out to spaces, and yeah, just the spaces that you both curate and create together are always so loving. And so of course, like, anytime y'all were like, oh, come this way, I was like, yes, I will be there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That means so much, just because we think the world of you, so that means a lot. But today is not about us. Today is all about so we did have some questions because you are our first performance artist to be featured on the Beyond the Screen series. So I wanted to kind of just talk to you a little bit about, or we wanted to kind of just talk to you a little bit about like those labels, right? Like, I know that we often say like, I don't do labels, but then we're quick to label ourselves artists or poetas.
Yeah.
Right? So like, as an artist, like, how do you navigate the artist labels? Because we've had conversations in the past around how performance artists, and that includes poets, like how y'all lived oftentimes on the margins, especially on the margins of fine arts, right? So like, do you identify with like the label poet versus like artist, or is it interchangeable for you? Like, when did you start identifying with either of the labels, and how did that come to be for you?
Yeah, I think it's funny when people usually tell me this. I think about a moment. I was in my first year of undergrad at SJSU, and one of my professors super amazing Professor Luis Juarez. He goes by Chago. We had a final. It was a public speaking class, and so our final, we basically could take any public speaking medium. So if it was like a skit from a play or a show or a movie or a poem that we wrote ourselves, and basically present that as our final. And so I had actually written a poem, and we had some folks that were coming in visiting, just sitting in the class, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's Miriam. She's a spoken word artist." And I was like, "What? Like, what? I am." So I had no idea what that label even was, because I hadn't heard of it before. And I just knew that I liked to write poetry, and I guess the way in which like it came out of me to him, because he already had known, like he is an actor, and was just a lot into like the performance arts already. Then he was able to identify that. So he was the first one to kind of like give me that label of like a spoken word artist, and to kind of also like encourage that form of creativity of like exploring like those labels, and not being I guess just not being shy about like taking on those labels, if it is something that we're already doing, so yeah, so he was kind of like the first, and then from there I was kind of like, okay, like kind of warming up to that title, and recognizing, yeah, that's kind of like what the work that I do is. And so I kind of like interchangeably between like poet, and spoken word artist. I guess I kind of like within the recent years, more towards just being a poet, and the label of, I guess, artist kind of is still like newer, because within like the recent years I started exploring with digital collage art, and also with illustration, digital illustration. And so that was something that was completely not really like in my scope, like some years ago, and recently like started exploring that within like the last like couple years. And so I think after exploring that, and then just thinking about that encouragement that like that professor had shown me some years ago, and then translating that into like current space, like, yeah, I am an artist, I am producing art in this way, and so not being I guess like shy about that, because like my art isn't shy. So I'm just gonna, yeah, like I'm an artist, and my poetry is not shy either. It's very it's just very present and very open. So I am a poet, and so yeah, so I think navigating those terms and those labels, and like having them be a part of my identity, was definitely something that initially I didn't even think about incorporating until kind of like that initial moment. And then now, as I've kind of like gotten a little bit older, and like starting to really like acknowledge and recognize like all of the work that goes into like creating poems, and performing them, and then creating like art pieces, like digital illustrations and things like that, and producing that work. Yeah, like se merece, the term of like artist and poet that.
Yes.
So yeah.
No, thank you so much for sharing. And yes, yes, first of all, I've never not thought of you as an artist. Like from the moment I met you, I'm like, badass queen, artista, poeta, yes, everything. But one thing that's really resonating with me is that you said my poetry is not shy, my words are not shy, and I think that that's kind of why I personally fell in love with you, because like, the event that we were at where we first met was kind of like outdoors, open space. Folks were kind of doing their own thing. It wasn't like, okay, now it's time to listen to the performers. Let's all sit down and listen. It was just kind of like, you kind of had to grab the attention.
Yeah.
And I remember, just you going up to the mic, honoring the land that you were on, honoring our ancestors, and then boom, performance. And I'm just kind of like, oh yeah. Who is she? You know, like,
let me put down the drink.
Yes, let me put down the drink. I'm sorry, but the shopping's gonna have to wait. No, and it was so magical and it was so powerful. And I guess, you know, maybe before we transition into kind of, you know, the subject matter and just the power behind your words, because I do have some, I did want to chat with you a little bit about that. For folks who maybe are not familiar with your work, do you mind sharing a small piece? Do you have something to share with us today?
Yeah, I actually, you know, it's so funny because when you initially asked that, I have everything on my phone and I'm using my phone right now for live.
I'm like, go grab her chat book and we'll hold it up.
I know. Do you have it?
Yeah, but I mean, that's
I think I think we might have to hold off on that because I just realized that right now that I would need my phone. Yeah, I used to just I guess just a quick note on that too. I used to be when I first got into like poetry and you know performing the poetry as a spoken word artist. I used to be really big on like I have to remember all of my pieces and like I'm not gonna perform withholding something, and sometimes like it would get me really nervous. Because I would put like so much pressure on myself, and then like within like you know just like the recent years, I've just kind of been like, you know what, like if you remember it, cool, but there's also nothing wrong with, you know, reading from your phone or reading from, you know, from the written work, the physical, like if it's a notebook or lo que sea, because it's like either way, like you're honoring the words, you know. So I think an old me would have been like, shoot, you should have like remembered something. But I think the me that's like kinder to myself right now is like, you know what, it's okay. So yeah.
No worries. And for all of y'all watching, she's a beast. She's amazing. Check out her work. We've been posting it for like years now, but more recently we've been posting it almost daily because, you know, we were featuring Miriam. And unfortunately, you know, we were going to actually, Miriam, you're working on your second chapbook currently, if I'm not mistaken. And you were going to submit some works at an event that we were specifically for you because the first time that you came to Vallejo, which is where El Comalito Collective is located, our community fell in love with you. And ever since, folks are just like, where is Miriam? We want Miriam. We want to learn. So, you know, so we had planned something in April around your birthday. Happy belated.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, the pandemic, you know, forced us to postpone that for until a future date. So hopefully Vallejo will still get to experience your beautiful reading in the near future.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But to all of you watching, please follow Miriam Viento Exol. Yeah, amazing work. But
yeah,
what I'm gonna say about your subject matter, you say that your words are shy, your poetry isn't shy. Why? How did you? And maybe if you want to touch a little bit on the different topics that you write about, from indigeneity to rounding head to being queer, like all of the subject matter that you touch on, none of it is apologetic. It's all unapologetic. It's all very in your face. Like, how did you decide that this is how and what and the approach that you have selected? Like, why this? Why not roses are red, violets are blue? Like, why not the beautiful lyrical haikus, right? Like,
yeah. Yeah, I think for me, when I think about like, you know, my poetry and my art, it's very much like a reflection of what is like my reality, you know? So if like the reality isn't, you know, like roses are red, violets are blue, then like that's not what's gonna be in the poetry. And it still can be, right? Like there are poets, there are pieces that I write where my poetry is very warm and is very it's very vulnerable and you know very loving, and those things are also not shy, you know. And so I think it's very much like a reflection of what I'm experiencing and like how I'm experiencing it. So I think for me when I write, I really want to make sure that what is happening like here and here is reflected in the pieces. So when I like you know, think about pieces that I've written before about like maybe like my former students, you know, and what it's like, you know, what it was like just like experiencing like moments with them when I write that. I really want to take the time to like honor them and that memory and that experience and storytell if that is, you know, even storytelling like within like the caption that isn't necessarily like a poem, or if within a poem or within an art piece, like take the time to like honor that memory and honor that experience like in that way, and not be just like not be shy about how that is conveyed. So, you know, sometimes like people might kind of like turn away from things that are like too soft, you know, or you know, and they might want something that's like, sometimes when people think of being apologetic, it can also be associated with like, yeah, like I'm apologetic, like fuck that, I'm gonna do whatever the fuck I want, da da da, and like being like more like in your face apologetic, right? But like being in your face apologetic can also be like being really vulnerable, and having like that same like unapologetic feeling with like our like soft, vulnerable, you know, emotions and feelings and thoughts, and I'm a soft person. So when I write and when I create, it's like some of it is like in, you know, like very in your face, like aggressive, like I'm angry, you know, about X, Y, and Z. And other times it's like in your face, unapologetic, not shy about I'm sad about this, or I feel really tender about X, Y, and Z. So taking that like that unapologeticness, through like an entire array of human emotions, and like just like honoring them too, you know. So so really just like doing my best to like honor and be unapologetic about whatever it is that I'm experiencing, you know. So if that is vulnerability, if that is anger, if that is love, if whatever it is, you know, exploring like the memories and those experiences, and just sharing them in that way so I can honor like that moment, you know. um yeah, so it's just it's really an invitation, I think, for everyone else to also like explore those things, you know, because sometimes like maybe we haven't had an opportunity to read or to look at something that conveyed like a similar experience for us. So being unapologetic and not shy about whatever those, you know, long array of human emotions it is, can also invite others to kind of participate in that experience, you know.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much
Mm-hmm.
for sharing that. One of the things that you just mentioned was, you know, that not a lot of us have the or have had the opportunity to read or to perform. Do you remember where that first opportunity was for you? Like, and I know that you mentioned the very first time that you decided to call yourself a spoken word artist because someone else labeled
Mm-hmm.
you first. Like, do you
Mm-hmm.
remember the first time that you performed and what that was like for you? Was it, I mean, I can't imagine that it wasn't frightening, but was it, were folks
Mm-hmm.
receptive to the work? Did like, what was that like, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, now that I think about it, I think, well, you know, like in high school, you know, you have like the poetry unit or whatever, and you have to like write a poem and like read it, and then yeah, it's very superficial, um, sometimes in the way that it's presented in the curriculum. But I think somewhere in my memory is probably a memory of a moment that I performed in there. But I think the most I guess like relevant memory that comes forward is from that class that I had talked about earlier, when we had done the final, and yeah, so that was like kind of like I think one of the first times, if not the first, that I was like performing a piece that I had written where I put like more intention into it, and it was that same time when the professor had you know, like referred to me as a spoken word artist, and I had heard that for the first time. um I do remember, just because I think I've always kind of been someone who, I don't necessarily like shy away or get nervous about like public speaking, and I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, being, you know, you think about like growing up in a family where like Spanish is like the first language, and like being like a child that is like bilingual, then it's like mom's always like ask this person to do or that I need X, Y, and Z. And I'm like 5 years old, like, okay, like, let me go ask the bank teller for this, you know? And so we're kind of already like, we have like this skill and really this strength, to already like public speak in a way, you know, even if it's in like in small like interactions, like from an early age. So I think that definitely, I think like helped, I guess when it came time to even begin like performing my poetry. Is like, yeah, like sometimes I would get very nervous, and I do get nervous because again, it's like just a lot of vulnerability, right? um so yeah, I think it does also, it's not something that, I know I can't do. So it's always something that I'm like, okay, like I this is like a beautiful opportunity to share and just like, you know, compartir with the audience. So so it's not something that like, you know, that would like intimidate me so much. Like I would still get nervous and like, you know, things like that. And like that first time, presenting, the first time that I remember, presenting in that class, I knew that what I wrote was, you know, my truth at that time. So however it was received, I was like, okay, well, that's just how they're going to receive it. But this is my truth at this time, you know? So, so just like being really honest with that, like helped me with, you know, with those nerves. But yeah, but I definitely still think that like I would get like nervous in the first part of like present of, you know, having to present, like, and the way those nerves show up, I probably like get like, you know, butterflies in my stomach, I get a little sweaty or whatever. but but I think, you know, ya cuando empiezo se me pasa, you know, and I'm like, okay, like, you know, I'm sharing something that is like a truth for me. And yeah, and I'm happy to share it. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. A couple of things you said, like really, first of all, I super relate with like having to be, you know, a 10-year-old paralegal, no medical jargon,
Yes.
no like academic language. Y cuando no sabía, then you'd have my dad being like, ¿Qué no hablas inglés?
Yeah, yeah.
We're laughing both inside, we're crying.
I know.
I know, straight up.
So no, but you know, so yes, totally relatable. Thank you for bringing me back to like my childhood with my mom and my dad. But you know, all of the times that we've seen you perform, you know, it's been in a space that's been super supportive and super like, you know, you say like I just remember reading one of my favorite poems by you, Brown Capital B.
Oh yeah.
And then you have everyone in the room going like, yes, so it's hard for me, you know, to imagine you performing in a space where maybe like your work is so, I mean, one of the things that I really appreciate about your work, Medium, is that it's very intentional. You know who it's for, like, and it's empowering for a lot of different folks, for queer folks, for brown folks, for folks who come from low income families, for folks who are first or whose English is a second language. I mean, there's so many, like, it's so intentional in so many different ways. But like, have you ever performed in a room where it was like this hetero bros, or for folks who are like mostly not folks of color, where like you're like, what the hell am I doing here? And
Yeah.
what happened?
Yeah. So it's actually like two main moments are coming that like come to my mind, and they actually both involve like me swapping out a poem that I wanted to perform for Brown Capital B, actually. The first place I was like, it was just an open mic, you know, and I just was like, okay, I'm in the area, like it seems cool, like it's a pretty popular like open mic, so I'm just gonna drop by. And so I like signed up and everything, and as I'm like, you know, sitting in the audience and I'm with some folks and we're looking at like just the crowd itself, and it's like a predominantly white crowd.
Yeah.
And there's also like a lot of like older white folks, and you know, they're getting up on the mic and like, you know, sharing things, and it's and like it just like was started feeling very very white centered. And you know, just like a lot of the things that they were sharing, I obviously like I can't relate to, you know, because I don't have that lived experience.
Right.
And I started to get a little bit frustrated because you know, like just right off the bat, like there was a lot of things that I think were being said and that were happening where you could see there's like a lot of privilege, a lot of ignorance to many things. And so I kind of initially was gonna perform like other like a I would think I was gonna do like a short like we each had like I think 5 minutes or something, so I was gonna do like a short read of like three smaller poems. Um, but I was like, you know what? No, I don't think I don't think that's what like I don't want to give them that part of myself of this like I don't want to give I didn't want to almost like give the space this like um softness of me because I didn't feel soft in the moment. In the moment I felt angry.
Yeah.
And in the moment I felt frustrated. And in the moment I felt the need to kind of like to affirm my space and my validity among like, you know, whiteness. And so I chose to swap out like the pieces for Brown Capital B. And so I read that, and then after like everyone was like, oh my god, like that was so great, blah blah blah, and I'm like, I know. And and I left. I left right after that, but I just wanted them to know like this is how I was feeling. And the second time was actually something very similar. I also was invited to perform at I don't know if I should like name the place, but at this like specific area, specific place that's like a pretty like big media platform. And so in my mind, I'm like hyped because I'm like, oh my God, one, they would consider me, you know, and like two, like I got invited and they want me to like, you know, to perform whatever. So I felt like really like excited and honored and like all this stuff. And I show up and it was specifically for folks like who identify as like Latinx and like all that. So I kind of like in my mind was like, you know, I think we have the hope that we will see like visibly like brown people or, you know, folks who maybe identify as like Afro Latinx, and just like have an array of melanin in the room and like, you know, everyone, you know, that like people will be able to just like relate to an experience, you know. And yeah, I like went in and I was like, wow, there's like a lot of like white passing Latinx folks.
Mhm.
And I started feeling so like, I don't know, just like really uncomfortable and like this like nervousness that I was like, I don't know, it kind of felt it didn't fit what my expectation was. Um so I think also like the space, it was kind of like kind of party kind of performances happening, but the performances happening were also like not as I guess not as here as I was hoping they would be. Um, and so I swapped out a piece that I was thinking of for Brown Capital B because I had that same feeling of like, okay, like I want to just kind of like convey to the crowd that like people who are visibly brown within this, you know, same community if they identify as such, like are here too. And right before I had also performed, I noticed that nobody had acknowledged at all that this was in San Francisco and it's Yelamu Ohlone territory, and no one had acknowledged that. So I made sure to acknowledge that because that's super important,
Yeah.
you know, wherever we're at. And so I had acknowledged that, and then also just acknowledged like how important it was like for folks to be inclusive of like Afro Latinx folks, and just because, you know, I noticed that there wasn't like hardly any in the space, and if you're talking about like Latinx night or whatever, like there are also like Black Mexican people, and there are also like Black folks within the community, like Afro Indigenous folks and all that. And so it's important to, you know, to make sure that they're included, and not just for the sake of inclusion, but for the sake of like it's the part of the community already, you know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, so I just like I swapped out that piece for Brown Capital B, and after that I was like, okay, like I did the piece and I said what I needed to say and I conveyed it in the way that I wanted to convey it, and I was like, I'm ready to get up out of here. So I think
so to clarify,
those are probably
to clarify, you didn't
no.
stay for the party component.
No, I did not. No. Yeah, so I definitely think that there are moments where I think more than anything it has been whiteness that has kind of like entered into these spaces and has like shifted the dynamic and has kind of like made me feel like, all right, like I want to make sure that they know that like I'm here, whether or not they choose to acknowledge me or see me, like I'm here, you know. Sorry, there's a lot of barking going on in the background. I apologize.
No, don't worry about it. We have dogs, and we get that they that they exist in this world too, and that they need to bark.
Yeah.
I think I appreciate you first of all for being open to sharing some of those stories. Folks are like Chula and Soli. I'm like, no, that's not our dogs. So thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that because the fine art world is centered around mostly painting, to be honest with you, that once the work is on the wall as visual artists, once the work is on the wall, we don't have a lot of control over who shows up. Well, actually, that's not true. There is some control over who shows up. But once the work is on the wall for us, like, there's not a lot we can do. Whereas with you, you do have the ability to make adjustments based on the crowd, based on who's showing up. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. But I also kind of wanted to touch a little bit about the fine art world and how poetry does live on the margins, right? And as folks who have access to a space and who offer, or I don't even want to say offer opportunities, but who, I don't know what we do. We foster opportunities. I'm like, that's our mission statement.
Create space. Yeah. It's a creation of space. Yes.
We always try and be very intentional about like, how do we incorporate the performing arts within this art world? And how do we do it intentionally as not a performer? Because oftentimes, it is a performance art. But I know that often folks who are in the performance arts are invited into spaces to provide entertainment. And that and that you're expected, and I don't want to project, but performance artists are expected to be grateful for the opportunity because the platform and the audience is payment enough. And that's absolutely not true. Like, if you're inviting a performance artist into the space, like, that's their work, that's their labor, like, that's their time. Pay them. Like, have you experienced this? And I understand that there's different levels, because you do have grassroots organizations who are doing really great work versus elite museums, and there's a whole like spectrum and everything in between. But like, has that happened to you? How do you navigate those spaces? Do you want to share a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I think definitely in the beginning of my time kind of like presenting and like performing my work and poetry, it's a performance, right? To have to like go in front of people and convey and be really vulnerable, and kind of like be open in front of a crowd. So it is seen as like, as a, like, oh yeah, like let's entertain the crowd, but also like takes out a lot, it takes a lot out of like the person who is on the stage. And so I think initially when I had started, I wasn't necessarily I didn't really know that like payment in that way was like attainable, I guess, so I was just kind of like, if people invited me to like go present somewhere and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna be there anyway, like, sure, so it was kind of like not really too much of like a big deal, I guess, for me. But I think like more so recently, within the last few years, I've kind of like had the opportunity to like recognize that, kind of like what we were talking about in the beginning, that like you know, se merece, like the label of like artist and poet and all these things, and se merece también an acknowledgement of like the labor that goes into not only like performing these pieces, but also like the creation of them, and you know, the heart that it takes to, you know, to kind of like always open up in front of a crowd, and to make sure that like create a space for like for the audience to be invited into that like performance, and to feel welcomed. And you know, because even when you think about like someone who's performing, if they're up there and they're not really like vibing with the crowd, or they're just kind of like, oh, I'm just here for whatever, and not really like I guess like in engaging or showing like love in that way, then it does kind of shift the dynamic. So the person who is performing like really has to like open up like heart, you know, to the crowd, and to be open and willing to like to engage, and to have like that vulnerability. So initially, like I didn't even think of those things. I was just like, yeah, I'm already here, I'm just gonna do it for free, don't even worry about it. And I think now if there are people who ask me to perform, I think I'm more, if there's not like already a mention of like some sort of compensation, or anything like that, like I'll like kind of like I will bring it up, if it is, however, like a smaller group, that I know, like maybe it's just like a group of students, you know, that are at a school, and they're like, hey, like we see you on Instagram, and they're like in high school or whatever, and they're like, can you come? And I'm like, yeah, sure. You know, because like I don't know you, but I already love you, like, yes.
Yes.
So, and also just taking into account my capacity, and what I'm able to provide in the moment. So if in my capacity I'm able to like to perform and present, you know, for like, you know, a group of kids or whatever, y no me cuesta nada, you know, like it's already close by, it's whatever, it's within my capacity, then yes, absolutely. If it's something like I'm presenting to, I don't know, like a fine arts museum, and I know that they got hella funding, and I know that it's going to be like a 2-hour drive and like all this stuff, I'm going to be like, okay, like here's like a list for like my compensation. Is this something that you know that you're able to do? If not, then we can explore like other options, blah blah blah, whatever. Go into like this whole thing. But I think it definitely like depends on the context. But I think more so as I've gotten more into feeling comfortable with like honoring and compensating myself for like the labor, then I'm just a little bit more I guess like not shy about, you know, like having those conversations with the folks that request some form of labor or work from me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's important because I think that what folks don't realize is that with visual artists, yeah, like there is like, as folks who have a space, you know, there is rent to pay, there are bills to pay. So there's a risk on both ends, right? That we're going to put a piece up for a month or 2 months or 3 months or however long the show runs. And that the artist is taking a risk by displaying their work in our space, because potentially may not sell, but it potentially may also sell. Whereas the performance artist doesn't have that luxury, right? Where it's like, if you perform and you're not getting compensated, like you're not going to get compensated. Whereas with the visual artist, their piece might sell, right? Like there's the opportunity for them to make money off of it being in this space, as well as potentially not make money. And just like we are paying for a space with rent and bills, like we're taking a risk on this piece or this set of pieces that we're hoping sell, but also may not sell. So there's kind of like that negotiating with a visual artist. But with a performance artist, it's like, if you don't get compensated, like you're not going to get paid. And I think that that's important for folks to know, which is why pay your performance artist if you have access to a space. And I think that that's really important, you know. So thank you so much for sharing. Did you have anything to add? It's okay.
He's just wholeheartedly agreeing.
Sorry.
Oh, y'all are so cute.
No, it's so true though. Like it's so much of your time and so much of your emotional labor that goes into these beautiful pieces. And I feel like when folks go in front of a crowd and they perform these works, or they recite these works, like I don't know if folks understand that you have to get taken back to that moment when you created this work to be able to give that 100 right? And that for a lot of time, I mean, the poetry can be happiness to death, right? And all the emotions in between. And so it's a lot, you know. And I definitely feel like when you're giving something to a crowd that's something so personal, like the least you can give someone is a little bit of something, you know what I'm saying? Like a little bit of love, please.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. Yeah, because it is. I appreciate what you said. Just like it really does like take you back to the piece that, if the piece is something about heartbreak or something, then you'd be like, "Ah," like over here thinking about my ex or whatever, or if it's like, or if it's something that's also really joyous, it could really just open up like that channel to like tap into that memory again, and it is a lot of emotional, like mental and like spiritual labor, to like have the self go back into that mindset to be able to convey it as precisely, but also as like filled with whatever emotion it is, as possible, like to the audience and to the crowd. So yeah, like it's a lot of it is a lot of labor that goes into it. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And we can't pay our bills with love, right?
Yeah.
Like, although we do appreciate the love, keep it coming. But when the both you and Evan touched on this a little bit, Miriam, about like work bringing you back to a specific space, and sometimes it can be a really beautiful space, but other times it can be like a really icky, ugly space. And I know that this is a lifelong practice. Being an artist is a lifelong practice and working on your practice. But have you found either tips or tricks that work for you as far as like, keeping yourself healthy and keeping yourself grounded and keeping yourself okay after you perform pieces that are heavy, or if you're performing in a space where you thought it was going to be loving and welcoming and empowering, and then realize like it's not, kind of like some of the experiences you previously shared, like, are like, as a performance artist, are there tips and tricks that you have or that you'd like to share around like how you take care of yourself?
Yeah, I think well, specifically for the initial part of your question, specifically like after a performance, if I know it's going to be something that's a really heavy topic, I think a lot of what I've written um, has needed to like come out of me in some way. Like those memories needed to come out and forward. And so I think the moment in which like it is written and I perform it, like I kind of have it as an understanding in my mind that like it's because this needed to happen, so if afterwards I feel like crying, it's because that needed to happen. I needed to share this piece, get my truth out there, and part of like that healing process, because a lot of what poetry is for me is like healing and exploration, like a healing of like all of these memories, and so if after the performance, like me da ganas llorar, and like I feel like crying, and then I do, and that's happened a few times, and particularly with one piece that I had written about my great grandma in Mexico, and just about I think this was a piece actually that you had heard, yeah, a few years ago. And yes, yeah, it's called Bones. So I had written it just in about the desecration of ancestral burial sites, and how it was common in Mexico, and my family were from Guanajuato, um, of just like digging up loved ones whose families weren't able to pay what they called the grave tax at the time, and then paralleling the history here with the Ohlone folks, the various tribes of the Ohlone folks here who have their sacred burial sites, shell mounts, that are continuously just looked over, built on top of all these different things. So when I first read that piece at a crowd, to a crowd at an event, I cried during and I cried after. And it was because I hadn't ever spoken of that part of my family's history, um, in like ever, you know, but like also recognizing that like the pain that is moving through me in that moment, and like the ache that is moving through me in that moment, is like generations worth of like of pain, of mourning, of grieving that couldn't happen, you know, that is now occurring. And it just so happens that it's occurring through this medium. It's occurring through poetry and through the sharing of poetry. And so afterwards and during, I did cry, and I needed to do that because that was like part of the healing. So I think something for me that happened with that piece, and then it's happened with other pieces too, particularly when I'm talking about family and when I'm talking about like people who I love, you know, and so I think part of I guess like the tip or whatever you would call it is like really just allowing yourself to move with those feelings. You know, I'm a really tender person. I'm real soft. So so I think like when I feel those things, I just kind of let myself feel them. And you know, if it wants to come out in like crying, then it does. If it wants to come out in like me just like being left alone and taking like a few breaths, and then that's what it is. But like I'm just really like honoring whatever I feel that I need to do in that moment, right? So that's like within performances, but then just tips for the self. I feel like that translates to in many spaces. So even through the creation process, like just creating creating poetry or art or whatever, like really letting whatever is moving through you, whatever's moving in the mind, whatever you see, like come forward in whatever way, on paper, on canvas, on laptop, whatever. And honoring that and like moving through that however it wants to move through you, however it wants to move through us, however those memories, those thoughts like want to move through us, just like let it do its thing, you know. and and trust. I think for me, I always trust that like, okay, at the other side of this feeling, what might be like a difficult feeling on the other side of this, I know that I'll feel better. I'll know that like you know, that this needed to happen, this needed to occur, I needed to move through that, you know. And what's beautiful is that the other side of that is like a really beautiful poem, or like a really beautiful, you know, digital illustration, or a really beautiful painting, or for you all or whatever, you know, like on the other side of like all of this, like these emotions that are coming up, is like this beautiful art piece. So yeah, I guess, you know,
No, thank you.
Moving with it, just move with it.
No, thank you so much for sharing that, Tambien. And before we start winding down and taking I saw a few questions that folks have been asking, so we will address some of those questions. And if you have questions for Miriam, feel free to write them down in the feed. But you know, as before we take questions, I did have one question for you, Miriam, and it's that, you know, I mean, we've personally gotten the opportunity and the yeah, just the privilege of sharing space with you outside of just like your poetry, and like we get to have fun and we get to chismear and to do our thing, you know.
Para los
But like,
queers.
yes, yes, in a beautiful queer brown space, you know, and that's been like really beautiful. But you know, your social media presence is so beautiful, and you know, you talk about the connection to the land, you talk here about your indigenous roots, body positivity, your poetry. But I did notice that there's not like a picture of you going, hey, down a roller coaster, or like, what does Medium like to do for fun? Like, what do you like to do when you're not being a total badass?
You know what's super funny? I literally, I was talking to my partner about this, and I was like that's literally all I do. Like when I post on IG, like me in the garden, me with my mom cooking, like me just like doing digital illustrations, and like, you know, like that's really all I do. I don't like roller coasters. I don't like aside from like yeah, like aside from, I guess, like, I mean, I like binge watch a lot of Netflix shows while I'm like, you know, while I'm like creating my little digital illustrations and stuff. But like, I really don't. I guess what I have on IG, like it really is like I refer to it as a digital home, and so I treat it like a home, so I share what I do at home in that digital home, right? And so yeah, so oftentimes it's just like me in the garden, me, you know, at work, or like, you know, doing this different arts, if it's digital illustration, if it's poetry, and you know, even just like reconnecting with like different, you know, ancestral foods and like growing things, like those things are art too. So yeah, so I think like that, you know, that's what that's what it is.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. You're like, I can't help it if I'm a total badass. No, a few questions that did come through. I do see your question, Gloria, so we'll take care of that one in just a second. But Nancy, earlier, a question that came through by Nancy was publishing. Like, are you self-publishing your books? How, like, what has that journey been like for you? And do you have any recommendations, I believe is what the question said.
Yeah, so the first chapbook actually came out of, I had like compiled like some of my poems, and I thought about like just like who I am as a poet, and I like compiled like this little like just a few of them, and then someone was like just talking about like, oh yeah, you should print it, and just like, you know, when you go and perform, and so I just kind of started looking into like what it would look like to print a chapbook. And so a chapbook is a little bit different than a like published and like bound book. So if you have like a book, it's like it has like a spine and it's bound and all of that. And like chapbooks, sometimes they could be like that, and just be like smaller. Other times it's literally just like you hit up Staples and like had booklets printed out, and so that's what I did for the first chapbook that I had printed. Is I had just compiled that, and I went to Staples, and shout out to dude at Staples that like you know was helping me out, because I was like, how do I like size this up and like all this. And so he like printed out like a bunch of different versions, and he was like, okay, this is how you would have it if you had like the front page as like cardstock, but it'll be a little pricier and blah blah, and think about how much you're gonna sell them. And I was like, okay, I think his name was Financio. But anyway, so I, yeah, like that's how I went about printing the first one. And I think because it was like a really short collection of poems, it was what was affordable for me at that time, and it was also like affordable and accessible. And so I just like kind of went that route. And it's, you know, it's, for me it was like a good first experience into like what that process is like. And so really it was just about like compiling the pieces and thinking about like how will the reader when they open this, like how will they kind of like experience the different parts of this small chapbook. And yeah, and then just like hitting up Staples and looking at like how much money do I have right now, and like how much can I, you know, can I print and stuff like that. So it was very simple. There's nothing like too crazy. Like I know some people, they'll like go to like publishers and like they submit proposals, and it's like this whole thing, and that's like definitely one avenue to take it. And I think the avenue that I took, just because what was accessible to me at the time, and me wanting to share a physical version of like my poetry, then I had taken that route. So yeah, that was the process. Shout out Nancy for asking that question.
Thank you. Yeah. And I see that Gloria, who shout out to Gloria. Gloria is also going to be on the Beyond the Screen show. Also talking about ancestral knowledge through hair, which is amazing. Shout out, Gloria. Yes.
I'm all like,
oh.
Los pelones.
So Gloria is asking, do you have a favorite fiction or poetry book that you, at the moment, that you recommend?
So I love, and I'm pretty sure everyone on IG knows Jessica Salgado.
Mm-hmm.
So she is profoundly beautiful. So yeah, I have all of her books, and I really love her work, and also just love her vulnerability. So so definitely that's one. Another one that I actually recently got that I haven't gotten a chance to explore yet, but it's by Erika Chilome. I think that's her name. That's how you pronounce her name, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. But it's spelled Edyka and then Chilome Chilome. So she recently has had released a book. I think it's something. I think it was called. I'm trying to remember because I don't have it in front of me. El Pomario del Colibrí, something like that. But it's like basically like the hummingbird poems. And so I just got it like I think maybe like 2 weeks ago, and I haven't opened it yet. But she is a fantastic poet, and she's so like soulful in the way that she shares her work. And she had a piece that she had previously published called She Speaks Poetry. And I got a chance to read that, and that was like profoundly beautiful. So her second chapbook is the one that I'm like gonna dive into. But she just as a human is incredible. So if you all have a chance to check out Erika, like for sure, check her out and support her work too. Yeah, so I think those two for sure. Yeah, those are the two that like came to my mind right now. So definitely just shout out to those two beautiful poets.
Yay. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Miriam, for being with us today, and for just blessing us with your beautiful energy and your beautiful social media presence. It's so healing and beautiful. If you have the means, please send Miriam a donation for just putting so much of her heart out every day on social media. Viento Exol. If you want to purchase Miriam's chapbook or merch, hit her up. Viento Exol on social media. You can catch her at an event near you at El Comalito once this is all over, I'm sure. And congratulations, because I know that you're also doing grad school, and I know that that's kind of tricky in navigating virtual space, which we won't go into because that's going to be another 10 hours.
Yes. Real quick though, can I just plug something else in real quick?
Yeah.
So if you are tempted to send a donation to me, don't send it to me. Send it to the link in my bio. I have a beloved family that is that recently lost an abuelita. So her name is Mary Garcia, and so I'm just sending a lot of love to the family. And it's the family of a youth that my very first youth that I used to work with at the juvenile home when I was an educator there. And now he's been out for many years, and I also received permission to share this, so that's why I'm sharing. And yeah. His name is Eric, and he is phenomenal. And he's now a family man. He's a father, and just thriving. And so their family recently lost their grandmother, and I'm going to be posting about it a little bit later today, so you all can kind of check out when I post that illustration that I had done for Mary. So if you are tempted to, after this conversation, donate, please click on the link in my bio. And if you're like, I love what you said, Miriam, love it on the GoFundMe for the Garcia family. And yeah, so just wanted to say that really quick.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have 30 seconds to log off, so we'll make this short and sweet. We love you, Miriam. Thank you for being with us today. The next Beyond the Screen, let's get real for real, de veras, is on Thursday with Gabriel Garcia Roman. There was an issue with the recording, so we're taking take 2. So we'll see you Thursday. Much love to everyone. Much love to you, Miriam. Thank you so much. Y hasta la próxima.
Okay, bye.